For more, let's bring in Weijia Jiang and Nikole Killion. Weijia is CBS News senior White House correspondent, and Nikole is CBS News congressional correspondent. It's good to see you both. Weijia, let me start with you. You know, from the outset, it really was this open question, how the Russian invasion of Ukraine might alter the geopolitical order. With that in mind, what are you hearing at the White House about China potentially providing military aid to Russia?
Well, CBS News has confirmed that China put in that ask for military aid. And we know that today the White House said that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan had a meeting with his counterpart in Rome to talk about some of these concerns, whether China does intend to respond to that, whether it will actually provide any assistance to Russia in its fight against Ukraine. Now, this senior administration official described that meeting as intense. We know it lasted for 7 hours, but there are still a lot of questions that are unanswered. They were very careful not to spell out any details about whether China has already, in fact, provided any kind of assistance to Russia in this invasion, and also what the consequences would be, even though the administration insists that Sullivan very clearly expressed to the Chinese that there would be consequences. We don't know exactly what that would look like. I tried to press Jen Psaki about that during the White House briefing, and she would not talk about any specifics either. But, you know, they insist that the message has been delivered to Beijing, that if they were to help Russia in any way, that they would have to pay some sort of price as well. And that gets a little bit tricky, right? Because obviously, you know, if they were sanctions, as an example, China could slap on retaliatory sanctions, and it could harm the U.S. more than it might, to be frank, if the U.S. and Russia tensions continue to escalate because of the nature of the relationship between U.S. and China compared to the one between U.S. and Russia. So we're monitoring this closely, Elaine, but right now we don't know exactly what was asked. We don't know, you know, the response from China, and we don't know exactly how the U.S. is prepared to respond.
Lots of unanswered questions, but arguably, as I think we said earlier, the biggest, most important meeting of the day probably was this meeting in Rome. And Weijia, what do we know, speaking of Rome, about whether or not President Biden could be headed to Europe in the near future?
Well, we know that it is a possibility, and the White House is considering it, but so far nothing has been confirmed. This is something I also asked of Jen Psaki today, and she said there are no trips to preview at this time, but we have reported that this is something that the administration has already thought about planning, that it could happen, that the president would go to meet with NATO allies in Brussels and perhaps stop in another country, although we don't have any details. And I think the big question is what the goal would be here, right? Because the president has made such a big deal about showing unity among NATO allies, but in practice, it's hard to tell what this trip would do, what it would accomplish. Does the president intend to go visit refugees? Does he plan to go to the Ukrainian border? Again, a lot of unanswered questions about what he plans to do, but we know that it is under consideration.
And Weijia, against that backdrop, there is growing bipartisan support in Congress to increase military aid to Ukraine, specifically fighter jets. Has the White House shifted its position on resisting those calls?
Absolutely not. I mean, Congress just passed a massive measure that included $13.6 billion in aid to Ukraine. On top of that, another $200 million in rapid assistance to offer more weapons, more machinery to Ukraine. But you're right. You know, the Problem Solvers Caucus sent a formal letter to the White House. Dozens of lawmakers signed on to say that they do believe the U.S. should be supporting a decision, you know, whether it is the middleman or not, to send more fighter jets to Ukraine, because that is exactly what President Zelensky has been asking for. But the White House has made very clear, Elaine and Ed, that they do not believe that is a wise move right now. They consider it potentially an escalation, that Russia may read that as aggression. And every decision they're making right now, they say they want to make sure they are avoiding the possibility of getting tangled up in this conflict. They do not want any U.S. involvement, military involvement. And so, the president has said that is a danger, that if you have a no-fly zone or if you send even equipment, that could be interpreted as interference by Russia, and that they could then, escalate even further. So they're trying to avoid that, but there is mounting pressure to do so. But just a reminder that you can't just turn an off and on switch when it comes to a no-fly zone and when it comes to providing these jets. And so that's exactly what the administration is saying, that, that U.S. service members could easily get roped into this, and that is exactly what they do not want to happen.
And it was fascinating in our CBS News poll yesterday that showed there's majority support for a no-fly zone, but then when those that we were asking the question of were reminded it could lead to a wider war with Russia, the number or the level of support dropped. So it was like, people, once they're reminded of the consequences, realized that this could certainly invest the United States a lot more in all of this. And yet, Nikole, up at the Capitol, members of Congress are set to hear later this week from the Ukrainian President Zelensky in a unprecedented, or at least rare, virtual address to lawmakers, right?
Yeah, that's right. That'll take place on Wednesday morning. And again, this will be a virtual address that will be open both to House and Senate lawmakers. And this comes on the heels of a call that many senators and some House lawmakers had with President Zelensky earlier this month. This was a Zoom call that he had with members of Congress. And at that time, that is when he made that plea for more air defense power in the form of fighter jets and more Stinger missiles and drone capabilities and support. And so we obviously know since that call that, there has been really this issue in terms of trying to move ahead with respect to those fighter jets, namely the administration, which, has expressed a lot of concern about the logistics and how that would be handled. So we don't know in this address to Congress if the Ukrainian president will put forth another plea, another request, but certainly we have heard from leaders on both sides of the Capitol. Leader Schumer saying a short time ago that this will be one of the highest honors of any Congress to hear from a foreign leader in this capacity at a time where this is a leader fighting for his life.
And Nikole, shifting gears, with last week's $1.5 trillion government funding bill, new COVID funding seems to not be happening. Now, Speaker Nancy Pelosi talked about this omission at an event in Brooklyn this morning. Let's listen to some of that.
I was very disappointed, I have to say. I mean, I usually would not say that to you, but this is the president's pivotal plan. We'll have to get it done, and would be my hope that we could bring up a bill this week that would do at least part of that. But we shouldn't even have to have this challenge, in my view.
So, Nikole, the administration is asking for this money. Why is it failing to get traction in a Congress with a Democratic majority?
Well, look, there were a lot of concerns about this, how this was handled. Keep in mind, this COVID funding was part of a broader spending package that was presented to the Congress. An omnibus bill is what it's referred to. And so tucked inside of it was this COVID funding. But what a lot of lawmakers weren't aware of and what they were concerned about is that some money that had been allocated to their states could be clawed back, because that was a sticking point with some Republican lawmakers for them to go along potentially with this funding. They wanted to make sure that any unused money was spent. And so once it came to some Democratic lawmakers' attention that money could be pulled from or potentially clawed back from their states, they got an earful from some of their governors. And so they said that they could not necessarily support moving forward with the package in its current form. And so the consequence of that, now that this COVID relief has been parsed out of it, does make it a much more challenging sell and uphill slog here on Capitol Hill, namely because a lot of Republicans, particularly in the Senate, again, have been opposed, and they say they don't really see the need for any additional COVID spending. So even if this clears the House, because we do know that Speaker Pelosi does intend to bring this bill up, and House leadership hopes to bring it up as soon as this week, once it comes over here to the Senate, it's likely to get bogged down unless Democrats can find a way to to get Republicans on board with this package. And that is of concern to the White House. They have made clear that without this funding, and right now it stands, originally they requested some I think it was about $30 billion. They brought it down to about $22 billion. But they say without this funding that this could really cause some consequences in terms of impacting testing capacity and capability, helping uninsured people, get access to tests and services, and also that the supply of monoclonal antibodies are set to run out later this spring. And that's why they need this additional funding. So there are a number of things that will be impacted, according to the White House, if this funding can't get through. But make no mistakes about it, it will be a fight here on Capitol Hill.
And Nikole, quickly, as we speak about COVID and the restrictions are getting peeled back across the country, we've heard today now there's a plan to reopen the U.S. Capitol to the general public, right?
Yeah, that's right. And this is something that lawmakers have been pressing for weeks, if not months, since it's been closed down to COVID, and then also since the January 6th insurrection. But CBS News has learned, according to two sources, that a draft plan was discussed this afternoon among a number of staffers, U.S. Capitol Police, and other officials here on the Hill charged with making these kinds of decisions that would essentially lead to a phased reopening of the Capitol later this month on March 28th. And so that would involve, for instance, increasing the number of official visitors that are allowed here at the Capitol. Right now, that number is capped at 9. That number would expand to 15 official visitors that would be allowed here on the Capitol. Staff-led tours could resume, and that number would be capped at 15 people per tour. And then, most importantly for a lot of parents out there, school groups would be able to come back and tour the Capitol again on a limited basis, where there would be about 2 groups allowed an hour for a total, I believe, of about 8 groups a day. So that is something that, again, people want to see this Capitol reopened. And then following that first phase, we would see an eventual reopening potentially of the broader Capitol Visitor Center. And then the hope is that perhaps by this fall, perhaps by Labor Day, then the Capitol could be fully reopened to what it was before the start of the pandemic.
Well, who among us didn't enjoy taking those middle school, high school trips to places like the U.S. Capitol? Good to hear that that's happening, and especially as the weather's getting better here and the tourist season begins. Weijia Jiang at the White House, Nikole Killion on Capitol Hill. Thank you both for joining us at the beginning of a busy week.
You bet. Thanks.